Forgotten, Midas and Crystal Skies from Lost 2021. I'm Aurian Archive, and we're diving back into hybrid theory on the Steam Deck. I'm going to pick up and follow up on some of what I dodged in yesterday's stream. Once again, I am going to try and keep this to about an hour, so hopefully this will be listenable too. And one of the points that was immediately noticeable is that early on I started talking about the chipset, why are we connected, I went down on why I think Valve might have a reason to hide the exact type of connection being used on the Steam Deck. That would also give us clarification, would give more information on the chipset being used. And then once I got to the next part, which was the question of a lack of boost mode while in docked mode, I completely skipped past the question of an additive performance through a docking system. And I skipped past that because it follows into the last slide that I did not show on yesterday's stream, but I had shown the night before when I was writing it. And that's where I really want to pick up on, because today's stream I want to focus more on the economics of product availability. And there was actually an update I saw that Valve is now apparently deciding to add colored versions of the Steam Deck based on user interest. And I think there was like a blue and pink version that was in the image. I would support the idea of being able to choose a deck that is customized to a specific set of colors. Maybe not something as maybe not something as expansive as the Xbox Labs controllers, but something that lets you customize a little bit of the available colors that the Steam Deck ships in. But before I get that far, I want to go back and focus on, in this case, additive performance over Type-C. Now, the reason why I dodged on the external GPU on the last stream is for reasons that I went into in a previous live stream. Another case of we don't have enough information. It's what we don't know. And we'll go ahead and get this shrunk down a little bit. We don't know who actually is manufacturing the Steam Deck. We don't know who is there a way I can get out of these dots? We don't know who is manufacturing the Steam Deck. Okay, apparently not. We don't know who is producing the PCBs. We don't know if Valve has a license to the AMD tech, including an RDNA2 license. We don't know if the Steam Deck is simply a performance basis for other vendors. Now, what this means is that because we don't know the answer to these questions, we don't know if Valve can add a GPU to a dock for the Steam Deck as a third-party vendor unto itself. In other words, can Valve function as an add-in board partner in respect to AMD? We don't know that. We don't know if Valve can sell. We don't know if Valve can sell a graphics card as a vendor, or if it has to come through a normal supply chain, e.g. Sapphire Tech, EVGA, ASRock, Asus, or other third-party vendors. That's kind of critical information that we don't have. Thus, we don't know if Valve is planning on selling additional desktop performance by offering a dock with a more powerful graphics card and a thermal solution. Again, this comes back to the Nintendo Switch. Nintendo never worked with Nvidia in regards to the Switch. We never got NVLink over USB Type-C, or we'll just call it Type-C. We never got PCIe over Type-C. We never got Thunderbolt over Type-C. We never got any. We never saw any connection-related technologies that Nvidia was using for its GeForce cards, including external GPUs, made available in the Switch hardware ecosystem. Okay, so keeping that in mind, can we safely say that Valve isn't considering this option? Can we safely suggest that Valve is not considering adding graphical performance by the addition of a dock? I don't think we can. And so let's kind of just move on and think about what this means. Additive performance. Why? Why add performance over a USB connection? Well, obvious reason would be higher resolution, higher frame rate, more detailed textures, increased draw distance. You know, the normal reasons why you would add a graphics card to a system. Okay? Can the Steam Deck leverage an external GPU? And once again, we are back to okay. I am not sure why Impress behaves like that. Whoa. Okay, format, edit, undo. I know I'm really tempted to go back and look and see what I just typed. Yeah, that's a way to wreck your train of thought. Okay, let's try that again. Why add a graphic card? Increased draw distance, increased resolution, increased texture detail, increased frame rate. Okay, so normal reasons of why you would add a graphics card. Can the Steam Deck, as a Linux system, understand an external graphics card? Yes. The bigger question is, will an external graphic card play nicely with the APU? Maybe. And this is where we come back to. And new slide. Is the deck a performance baseline? By performance baseline, in theory, any hardware vendor that can offer a hardware solution that runs games on Steam, either native Linux or through Proton, that meets the baseline performance of the initial Steam Deck, may brand their device with a Steam Deck compatible may brand device with a Steam may indicate that their device is Steam Deck compatible. Or by performance baseline, in theory, can any hardware vendor that can offer a hardware solution, e.g., if Intel offers a competitive platform that reaches similar performance, can that platform also be sold as a Steam Deck? So, thus is the Steam Deck, or how do I want to put this? Again, we don't know if how close Valve is to running Proton, which is a clean wine, on ARM64 or RISC architectures. We assume that Valve intends to port Proton to ARM64 and thus run existing Steam plus Windows games on a Linux platform atop the ARM hardware ecosystem. Now, keeping this in mind, this is where we get back into going back to the generational Steam Deck releases. And that really brings us where we kind of want to be talking about. Coming back up here, I theorized that a Generation 2 is using a standard USB 4 connector. And I theorized that a Generation 3 might be using a Thunderbolt 5 connector. But there also is another option, and that is we'll go back to the chipset, and we'll add in a Gen 4 PCIe 5 over USB Type-C. Now, PCIe 5, and I may want to do this in the browser that can be put on the streaming. Alright, so PCIe 5 USB. Now, there's not really a whole lot of information about how close PCIe version 5 or how closely it will align with USB. PCIe version 5 is 32 GT, so X16 is 63 gigabyte per second. This is lower than the leaked numbers for Thunderbolt 5, which is 80 gigabits per second. So keeping that in mind, PCI Express 5. Their controllers are available. Now, the PCI SIG announced PCI Express 5 in 2019. Now, PCI Express 6 uses PAM4. And that's where we come back to, I think that PAM3, Pulse Amplitude Modulation 3, over the non-return to zero NRZ modulation. I think that's going to be ready first, and that's where we come back to Thunderbolt 5 or PCIe 5. Thunderbolt 5 theoretically offers more bandwidth, but since it's still in development, could the Steam Deck release with a PCI 5 over USB instead? And that's where we don't know. And another question here that I want to go back into, as I find the correct... actually, we may just do... Come on, get in there. We may just do a new slide for this. Isn't Thunderbolt an Apple Intel thing? Well, it was. Since Apple has ditched Intel, and this is something I saw recently, RDNA2 on M1. In that Apple likely, Extreme Tech reported in April 26, 2021, that Apple was likely to use AMD RDNA2 GPUs in the future. And also, in April, macOS 14 added AMD Big Navi to 6800 series officially. And the Mac Pro was just updated with RDNA 2 graphics cards over the Vega 2 offerings. You can now have a Radeon Pro W6900X, a Radeon Pro W6800X, or a Radeon Pro 6800X Duo, in addition to the existing 580X, 55X, and 5700X options. Now, scrolling down here, is Thunderbolt even listed? Okay, each of these cards uses Apple proprietary MPX form factor. Each has 4 Thunderbolt 3 ports. So, AMD has been working with Apple on Thunderbolt. And we can go ahead and put that down. AMD has been working with Apple on Thunderbolt. AMD has been working with Intel on Thunderbolt. Thus, we don't have any particular reason to discount at this time that AMD could not have Thunderbolt ready for the Steam Deck before another connection type, or Thunderbolt 5 or Thunderbolt 4 as over Type-C would be ready before PCIe, or it would be a better option than PCIe over USB Type-C. Alright, so we can probably type that down too. In theory, Thunderbolt 4 or Thunderbolt 5 would be better options over USB Type-C than PCIe 4 or PCIe 5 over USB Type-C. Again, Thunderbolt 5 is 80 gig on PAM3. PCIe 5 is only 64 GB per second. So we don't have enough information here yet on what AMD is doing, on what Valve has licensed. We have speculation. Thus, okay, we can put that down there. We can speculate that Valve would love to sell GPUs in docks, as those GPUs would fundamentally be unusable for racked crypto mining, and thus unappealing to those purchasing with intent to calculatory control over a digital currency. In other words, Valve can make more money selling GPUs in docks for the Steam Deck at the GPU MSRP, and that's got to be an attractive option. But is that all that Valve could really be planning? And let's go back over this. We know Valve's not telling everything. We really don't have enough information. We can probably say that PCIe 6 is probably out as an option because it does require a PAM4. Alright. We can also say we know there's no boost mode. Okay, and I feel like I kind of have to go back and talk on the boost mode for a second. The reason we've come to expect a boost mode in a docked mode is that the docked mode offers more continuous power than the battery. The AMD APU, according to the Steam Deck website, only uses 15 watts at maximum power. So there's a hard limit there on how much power it's going to be consuming, how much heat it's going to be putting off. There's no boost mode because there's no additional cooling required to exhaust the thermal output at a higher performance envelope. Now, could you stick an ice dock on the Steam Deck and get more reliable performance? I don't think so. And I don't think so because if you've ever had a Valve product before, the Steam Link, specifically I have the Steam Link and the Steam controller, and the build quality is jaw-dropping. I mean, it's an industrial grade versus the cheap plastics that are normally used in such devices. So I think Valve has done their homework on thermal exhausting. And that's come back to it's why I dodged over in just I've talked about the external GPU before. I think that's where Valve could make money on the dock or own docks. And I think that's one of the reasons why Valve might be playing cagey with what the USB support is actually capable of, again, because they were playing cagey on the memory controller. We're not using a standard X5070 or XB450 or whatever lower mobile or lower higher mobile chipset that might be used in a standard device. So let's go ahead, now that we've talked about a dock, talked about additive performance over Type-C, why you would want it, why it would make sense to Valve. I didn't exactly answer. Will an external graphics play nicely with the APU? And I said maybe. And we'll go back and we'll look at this one. If you have fine-tuned control, like last night, yesterday, I went over that in this theoretical construct, we're using Vulkan for threading, and we're telling each of the individual compute units to do a specific task using Vulkan threading. Now, if we're doing that, then yes, we could simply just expand those threads to an external graphics card. And then we can just put the internal graphics unit components on anything we want them to. If you're using Vulkan threading, you could even, and we'll do a new slide. Vulkan threading. What can't you do? Can you instruct compute units on a detailed level? Should be able to. Can you instruct compute units to only render some aspects of a scene? Should be able to. Can you instruct an external card to render specific parts of a scene, while the internal compute units render another part? E.g., your internal CUs, compute units, render the overlay based on Z buffer, while the external card renders the environment. Sure. Why not? What stops? There is nothing in theory and that's really the point. Vulkan as an API is built to do threading and instructions on a very finely detailed level, and that keeps getting improved and improved and improved with each successive iteration of Vulkan. So yes, you should be able to instruct compute units on a per compute unit level. You should be able to instruct compute units to only render some aspects of a scene. You should be able to tell the internal compute units to render specific parts of a scene, say like an overlay, while an external compute unit handles other parts of the scene. There's no reason why you should not be able to do that in Vulkan. That's kind of the whole point of it being a threaded or thread aware or thread capable API. Now, a lot of the documentation is focused towards using Vulkan in a CPU threaded manner, but that CPU threading can be extended and modeled on a GPU threading manner. Is it easy? No. Oh, hell no. Getting Vulkan to work like it can work can almost be as difficult as making OpenGL behave. Thus, a lot of developers and publishers aren't interested in optimizations that require training and developer involvement over and beyond existing toolkits and industry inertia. Basically, developers don't use Vulkan or DX12 for that matter to the extent that the APIs allow, simply because there is such a small install base or no installed base at all that can leverage the extents of those APIs. And most publishers are unaware of how to grow a new market. Now, there's a reason I put this shot firing, that most publishers are unaware of how to grow a new market, at the second to last thread. So let's go ahead and jump down to that final slide, the one I didn't go into. And this is where, on the late night, 4-hour long plus stream, I went into this. And I went into, in previous live streams, I've talked about how Steam machines and the Steam Deck are polar opposites. Steam Deck is the anti-Steam machine. And on Steam machines, the question is, what went wrong? Well, you had bad faith from the original design manufacturers. You had bad faith from the original equipment manufacturers. Valve didn't understand the hostile relationship between Debian and Ubuntu. And quite frankly, developers and publishers were not interested in profits. And we're going to address this one first. That's a pretty bold statement to make. But here's a simple rule of economics. The more people you can sell your product to, the more people that can purchase your product. If you artificially limit your product's reach, you will, of course, have low sales. This combos into, you cannot predict future market trends. Nobody predicted the iPod. Nobody predicted the iPhone. Nobody predicted Android. Nobody predicted Chromebooks. Vendors just did. Or you can't. I know what I want to say, and vendors just did it, but I think that's too vague to say, well, vendors just did it. Apple, Google, and others made the best product they could to fit real-world usage scenarios, ostensibly without the goal of carving out number one sales positions. Now, saying that now seems a little strange, especially in respect to the anything Apple does. But the problem is, Apple only talks about millions of iPhones sold. Google talks about trillions of Android activations. The thing is, it's not even a question. Android is a much bigger software environment to sell into than Apple. It's trillions of Android activations, not millions. But if you look at all of these sales records, you think that, well, Apple's the number one. No, they're not. Apple's a by the numbers, Apple is a small niche player who occasionally puts out a phone that some people buy, and that's not an understatement. Apple phones simply, the thing is, most of those sales markets place Apple so highly because they are narrowly focused on a single market segment. And if you're only comparing the Apple iPhone to the Samsung Galaxy S21, or whatever Galaxy's owned by now, the Apple may have more sales than any single vendor. But there's a number of Snapdragon 888 phones out there. There's a Rogue 5. There's the the One Plus phone from Oppo. There's the ZTE Nubia Red Magic 6R, the Red Magic 6, the Red Magic 6 Pro. You have all these other vendors that are selling Android phones. But the market analysis only focus on 1v1 because that's the only scenario in which iPhone looks good. But that's not the point here. This isn't a slag on Apple. This is to point out that in specific market segments, Apple dominates. And nobody predicted that. Nobody predicted the iPod. Nobody predicted the iPhone. Nobody predicted Android. Nobody predicted Chromebooks. Now, how they got there by slagging, the Chromebooks got where they were because Google looked at the war between GNOME and KDE and said, screw you both, we're doing our own thing. KDE amped up their game. And I said there was a page I would come back to. And if I have time, we'll be getting to that page in a moment. But here's the thing. You have a number of games sold today are sold on the basis that the PlayStation, Xbox, PC, Switch, Android, and iOS products are completely separate SKUs with completely separate budgets, with completely separate controls, with completely separate sales targets, with completely separate profit or a separate returns on investment. Returns on investments. That's just wrong. And this is where we get down to this final point here. The way EA, Activision, Take-Two, and all of the other big publishers treat gaming is completely wrong. Their game sales are predicated on short-tail economic models, where they assume that a game there is the assumption that a game will have 99% of its lifetime sales in mere months, or let's just say in under 3 months, at which point there will never be sales again without some kind of DLC or other additive promotion for that title. Every single Nintendo game ever begs to differ. How many of us rebought Wind Waker? How many of us rebought Ocarina of Time? How many of us bought the Zelda collections? Every time Nintendo releases Zelda, we don't look at the price point, we just buy it because it's Zelda games are great. Well, except for Breath of the Wild, that was actually pretty bad. No, I didn't like Breath of the Wild. As a Zelda game, it's not very good. As an open world Nintendo answer to Skyrim, it's okay. I mean, it's not Zelda, but it's okay. And I realize I am stirring the pot there intentionally because Breath of the Wild implemented a lot of features and a lot of, if you have a breakable equipment in a game, you completely, and you're putting it under a Zelda tag, you've completely forgotten who your target audience is. You just have. You don't understand them. You have no business making a Zelda game at that point. And I could rant about that for hours, but I want to try and focus on the Steam Deck and the economics, because we're at what? We're 42 minutes. I don't need to go off on another tangent. But the thing is, the short tail economic model that the major third-party publishers base their entire stock portfolios on is just wrong. Games are a long-tailed economic model, like any other form of entertainment. It's Bob Hope, Bing Crosby movies. They're still just as good today as the day they were filmed, because they are good movies. They are very entertaining. They tell a story from one end to the other. They give you humor. They give you things to laugh at. They give you things to cry at. Every other branch of entertainment, from the Brothers Grimm's fairy tales to the handed-down Tales of Rip Van Winkle, it's a long-tailed economic model. Games sold today have value still in the future, and they always will if they are a good game. Now, strangely, the only come on, get back into the text. Strangely, only Microsoft seems to be treating gaming as a long-tailed economic model. It's pretty much the last one that you would expect to do that. And this is where we come back to developers and publishers who are not interested in profits. The more people you can sell a product to, the more people that can purchase the product. The longer your product is available, the more sales you can get. This is simple this isn't economics 101. This isn't economics 101. This is economics 001. The clap beforehand. If you artificially limit your product reach, you'll of course have low sales. And so that brings us back to here. Steam machines. The developers and publishers who were pushing games on Steam didn't understand that by building their games for Linux, they were automatically forcing their developers to develop good practices. And we're going to go ahead and do a new slide. And we'll title this slide Building for Linux. Building for Linux building for Linux and Windows simultaneously. I really butchered the spell on that one. Forces developers to leverage good coding practices, avoid obfuscated code, avoid black boxes only they understand, and to document the code. Code that can clear both Windows and Linux from a single source will be cleaner, easier to understand, and easier for other developers to maintain, as the different operating systems will force developers to not use specific optimizations that are only valid for a single platform. So bringing this back to publishers and developers didn't understand, okay, we need to add something here. Games that have been or any software that have been built to be cross-compatible with Windows and Linux by default from the source code has been able to land on new processor architectures faster. Well, I misspelled that. Faster, or have been able to land on new processor architectures in less development time than software specifically coded for one platform or another. Software that has been built to be cross-compatible with Windows and Linux by default from the source code is generally more performative, e.g. takes less time to complete operations, and the code is cleaner at the base, or better leverages, is generally more performant in that it takes less time and or is better at leveraging system resources. Software that has been built to be cross-compatible with Windows and Linux by default from the source code is generally faster, or is generally more performative in graphics is more performative in that less time is consumed to complete operations. In that the graphics code has to be better optimized to cleanly compile to Vulkan, OpenGL, DX targets. So, if you are building for both Windows and Linux, not only can you hit new processors with better code faster and be more performative, if you're running a game, your graphics software is generally more performative by default because you are not adding specific optimizations to the code for a specific platform. You're having to write cleaner code to begin with, thus it is optimized and can be compiled more cleanly by the compilers used to generate the shader code to begin with. And there's another advantage. Software that have been built to be cross-compatible with Windows and Linux by default, from the source code, is generally able to target other non-Windows and Linux platforms with less work from the developer, as the code is not reliant, or is not generally reliant, on operating system specific components. I mean, if it sounds like and reads like I'm teaching a class in Computer Science 101, I pretty much am. This is 101. This is what you get before you even crack open the textbook. Or, yeah, I'm at what? I'm at 51 minutes, so I'm closing in on tying this off. So Steam machines, what went wrong? We had bad faith ODMs, we had bad faith OEMs, we had hostile upstream, we had hostile downstream, we had developers and publishers didn't understand the basic economics of the business they are in to make a profit in, and they don't understand good development practices. Real quick, moving on to Steam Link. What went wrong? Well, nothing went wrong with the Steam Link. It's perfectly... I love it for using remote. I'm using one right now, literally, to talk to my media server, to project it to a display that's not my TV, and so I'm able to work more comfortably rather than trying to sit back and, lounge back in the easy chair and which is facing the television. Okay, and maybe I'm not that comfortable sitting where I am, and the chair is kind of... This is not my favorite chair, really, if I'm strictly honest. But I love the Steam Link for what it does. The thing is, the Steam Link came... It was a product with a terminal shelf life. Everybody has a mobile phone. Mobile phones generally have USB Type-C ports. You can still get some that don't, if they have Apple printed on them, but for the most part, the phone you're probably going to buy has a USB Type-C port. You can hook it up to a hub. You can hook it up to a DisplayPort output and get your display on anything that DisplayPort supports, which is every TV out there. You can, if you really want to, even hook it up to a component television using the red, blue, and green cables. The thing is, the Steam Link was a product with a shelf life. Everyone already had a device that was capable of doing everything the Steam Link did. So we're basically buying a hardware buy-in. Something that got the job done then, now. But now you can get Steam Link on your Android device. I think you can get Steam Link on your iOS device. And you can do everything that the Steam Link itself did, but in a device you probably are carrying with you. That all you need is a USB hub, and you can get everything the Steam Link offered. So it wasn't a bad product. It was a good product. It was just one with a shelf life, because eventually everyone is going to have a phone powerful enough to do everything the Steam Link did, and possibly even do it better. And that's where we get to the Steam Deck. And direct response to everything that went wrong with the Steam machines. It's a vertically integrated. Valve is not trusting an upstream or a downstream developer. They're using Arch Linux directly, which is not tied to any other project. Valve now, they're not trusting different graphic card to be put in. They're using a graphics card Valve can hire people to develop the drivers for. So if there's I just brought up OBS, and for some reason I appear to have lost Impress on the stream, and I'm not sure. There we go. I'm sorry, I have no idea how long OBS was turned off. I think since the last time I looked at the time, we're at 54 minutes. So I'm not going to get through all of this. But you can go, if you want to read ahead, you can kind of see where I'm trying to go with this. And here's the thing. We still don't know some of the specifications. We don't know the expansion capabilities. I don't think Valve is going to sell a machine or sell a device that doesn't have some sort of future compatibility. If Valve can, and this comes back to all the way up here, external GPUs, because Valve has said themselves that when it comes to the Steam Deck, they have not found a game that cannot work with it. But eventually there will be games. What do you do then? If you have you're on mobile taking a hit on the detail, taking a hit on the frames per second. Okay, it's only targeted at 30 frames per second on that screen anyways. I think that's 30 frames per second with FreeSync with a 60 hertz display. But eventually you do get to the point where upcoming games may not run. Well, what do you do then? Well, if your dock contains an external graphics processor that can be accessed over USB Type-C at PCI Express speeds, I mean, if you're able to get a PCI Express 16x speed connection over the Type-C port and Thunderbolt 5 delivers that in spades, then you can just have a GPU in a dock, and then in docked mode, your target base can still play all of the newer games coming up, while also still being able to take those games on the go. And like with the Switch, you have that trade-off. You're taking on the go, you do expect a loss in fidelity, or you'll take the slightly higher fidelity for a lower battery life. It's however you use it. And so that's why it's so important, I think, to focus and drill down on exactly what the Steam Deck is capable of, and what the generation models will bring, and what future expansions will look like. Alright, we are at 56 minutes, so I'm going to go ahead and cut it here. And tomorrow I'll pick, or intending to, I may not tomorrow, maybe a day or so before I get back to this, we'll just pick up and we'll start talking about where I think Valve can or will go from here. What's next? And I think there's a massive infrastructure change coming on Valve's part. I think they're going to make a hard play to justify their 30% take on the games that go on the Steam storefront. And I think a big part of that will be expansion into either white box OEM devices or further developer service. But if you want to read the slides, you can go ahead and read what my guess is on that more, and I'll be extrapolating on that sometime shortly in the future. This has been Hybrid Theory. I'm Aurian Archive.